Hello everyone. I wanted to share an article by Victor Wallis, who is an eco-socialist and seems kind of libertarian Marxist in his leanings. I wanted to just raise the caveat that I don't completely agree with all of this person's analysis, but I wanted to share it anyway because there are lots of people on here who are saying, I used to watch your videos and now I've quote-unquote read the theory, I've decided I'm a Leninist. And I wanted to include this essay to try to dissuade people who are coming from that perspective or who are going in that direction. He does raise some important objections to Lenin when it comes to the Russian case. This article was originally published in 1978, but has since been extended and included in the book Ours to Master and to Own, Workers' Control from the Commune to the Present, edited by Emmanuel Ness and Dario Azzolini. So let's listen. Workers' Control and Revolution by Victor Wallis. Part 1. In the perpetual striving of the left to integrate long-range vision and immediate practice, the idea of workers' control occupies a special place. On the one hand, its generalized application would satisfy one of the main requirements for a stateless society. On the other, the basic units and the specific measures involved are such that it can sometimes be implemented within particular enterprises in an otherwise capitalist framework. From the first of these perspectives, workers' control has always been one of the most radical possible demands, indistinguishable in effect from the communist ideal, while from the second it has been perceived as limited, innocuous, and easily co-optable. How can a single demand appear at once so easy and so difficult, so harmless and so explosive? The contradiction lies, of course, in the system that has given rise to the demand. Prior to the development of capitalism, the concept of workers' control of the production process could not have been a demand. It was a simple fact of life, within the limits allowed by nature. Hence the apparent accessibility of workers' control, which on principle reflects no more than the capacity of all humans to think as well as to do. In these terms, it should not be surprising that workers on occasion take over and run productive enterprises without necessarily having an explicit socialist consciousness or political strategy. The faculties they draw on for such initiatives are not so much new as they are long suppressed for the majority of the population. It is the overcoming of this suppression, as old as capitalism itself, that constitutes the explosive side of workers' control. What workers' control points to is more than just a new way of organising production. It is also the release of human creative energy on a vast scale. As such, it is inherently revolutionary. But at the same time, because of the very weight of what it must overcome, it appears correspondingly remote from day-to-day struggles. As a political rallying point, it has two specific drawbacks. First, its urgency in many situations is not likely to be as great as that of survival demands. Second, its full application will remain limited as long as there are economic forces beyond the reach of the workers, whether within a given country or outside it. Concern with these dimensions is often seen as precluding an emphasis on workers' control and, as a result, the self-management impulse, despite its original naturalness, is consigned to utopia. Such a dismissal is altogether unjustified. The growing interest in workers' control since the late 1960s cannot be explained merely by its timeless qualities. As in Marx's critique of capitalism, it reflects a definite historical juncture. The countries with extreme physical privation are no longer the only ones in which the system's breakdown is manifest. The advanced capitalist regimes are likewise in question, if not for the first time. A new feature of the post-1960s crisis is precisely a redefinition of the concept of basic needs. The environment, after all, exists inside as well as outside the workplace, and the old distinction between survival needs, identified with wages, and other demands, self-determination, participation, and control, is becoming increasingly blurred. Linked to this is the fact that the fragmentation of the capitalist work process has reached a limit in the leading industrial sectors and is fast approaching it in clerical and sales operations. As the reaction proceeds, there is no reason for it to stop halfway. Finally, with the rightward evolution of the Chinese leadership, the major international model in the third quarter of the 20th century, new space has opened on the left to re-examine long-held assumptions about revolutionary organisation. But despite all such arguments for placing workers' control on the agenda, one may well remain sceptical as to its real promise. Consider first the potential significance of isolated self-managed or cooperative enterprises. Their usefulness as models is limited in several ways. They are generally small, and if they grow, they tend to take on traditional capitalistic incentives and administrative practices. They are unlikely to emerge in core industries, simply because the terms of a negotiated property transfer would be beyond the financial reach of the workers. A second possibility to consider would be some of the West European reform models. These seem to have stopped short of all but the most token worker input, except in the Swedish case. In Sweden, the results are more impressive, extending to major changes in the work process, flexibility in scheduling, and even the beginnings of a collective input into production decisions. However, this is still not control. It does not reflect a decisive shift of power. As a third alternative, we might consider those post-capitalist societies that instituted some form of elective principle at the factory level. As of the late 1970s, the two major cases in point were Yugoslavia and China. But in both countries the measures were limited in their scope and were subsequently offset by decisive reversions to earlier practice, market-oriented in the case of Yugoslavia, bureaucratic in the case of China. More generally, however, the regimes and leaderships of First Epoch socialism tended to view their own political rule as obviating the need for democratic restructuring of the workplace. Cuba, in more recent years, would become the first country with a broad socialist agenda to gradually implement worker control measures following an initial transfer of class power at the level of the state. And firstly, I want to just raise a possible objection here as Libertarian Socialist rants. I'm very sceptical of any attempt to institute workers' control as some kind of gift from above. That's not really how these things happen. For more information about this, I recommend watching Zoe Baker's video on the problem of socialist transformation. It was made about 3 years ago, and it goes into detail about how workers need to develop the skills to self-manage through the revolutionary process itself. And that's a very different thing from saying some centralised authority is going to supposedly give control to the workers. And when you look at the history, for example, Sam Dolgoff's writings on the Cuban Revolution and anarchist eyewitness reports of the Cuban Revolution, there are examples of workers' control being destroyed, and that's a problem. I reject the idea of creating some kind of new class of political rulers. I want to do away with rulers altogether. Back to the essay. The Cuban Revolution constitutes a kind of historical bridge between, on the one hand, the revolutions and regimes precipitated by imperialist invasions and led by vanguard parties, and on the other, the post-1989 wave of grassroots movements, most evident in Latin America, which from the outset accorded new emphasis to mechanisms of popular participation. This latter development heralds a fresh chapter in the global history of workers' control. Until this most recent period, however, workers' participation in management normally fell very far short of control except in very isolated cases, even where considerable social upheaval had intervened. While workers' control thus did not appear impossible, it at least seemed to require unusual conditions for its success. There is one type of experience, however, that transcends all boundaries, the experience of the revolutionary periods themselves. Workers' control has gone further and deeper during such periods than at any other times, whether pre- or post-revolutionary. Moreover, far from being peculiar to this or that crisis, workers' control initiatives have arisen during all such moments. Clearly, we are dealing with a phenomenon of universal force and appeal, as suggested by two immediate considerations. First is the range of settings in which the initiatives rose. Without setting any comprehensive criteria as to the depth or thrust of the crises, a listing would have to include Russia 1917 to 18, Germany 1918 to 19, Hungary 1919, Italy 1920, Spain 1936 to 1939, Czechoslovakia 1945 to 47, Hungary and Poland 1956, Algeria 1962 to 65, China 1966 to 69, France and Czechoslovakia 1968, Chile 1970 to 73, and Portugal 1974 to 75. Second, and more decisive, is the fact that in no case did the radical initiative die a natural death. Although there may have been natural disadvantages, inexperience, excesses or abuses, what killed the initiative in every case was not any loss of momentum, but rather the threat or use of armed force. If we grant then that workers' control has displayed a core of viability, it remains for us to ask what all these experiences imply as to its possible institutionalization under stable conditions. Focusing first on the Russian case and then on three cases, Italy, Spain, Chile, more directly pertinent to advanced capitalist democracies, we shall explore such matters as the capacities of the workers, the ripeness of surrounding conditions, and the role of political leadership. We shall then consider possible new configurations suggested by more recent developments in Cuba and Venezuela.